They said Mesa Hollow forgot people like Agnes Morrow. Not with malice, just the slow, shrugging way a place lets go of what no longer stirs dust or whispers stories. Her house sat at the bend of a gravel road, where mail came late and left unread. Shingles warped in the summer heat, the porch leaned like it was tired of standing. But the lamplight in her window never failed same hour every evening. Not for visitors. There were none, just ritual, habit, maybe hope. Agnes, in her 68th year, moved like someone who used to dance but forgot the music. She wore her hair in a tight braid, always neat. Her hands, though gnarled with time, still threaded needles, still kneaded dough. She spoke to no one and answered even less. The townsfolk knew her by three things: the tin kettle she carried to the well, the black shawl with frayed lace, and the way she looked at people, not like she judged, but like she remembered. She hadn't been to church since the war ended, hadn't sold at market since before her husband's name was carved into stone at Shiloh Ridge. And her son folks said he left angry. Something about land or pride, or maybe both. No one asked her. No one dared. Children threw rocks at her fence once years ago. She didn't scold them, just picked up the stones and built a little pile beside the gate. It stayed there growing moss. She wasn't feared. She wasn't pitied. She was forgotten in plain sight like an old song with no singer left. But every morning she opened the door, stepped onto the porch and stared at the road like it owed her something. And maybe in some quiet, stubborn way, it did. The wind brought him in. Late October, when the cottonwoods began to whisper of frost, and the sun felt more like memory than heat. Agnes was peeling potatoes by the sink when she heard the knock, not loud, not hurried, just three slow taps, like someone unsure whether they wanted the door to open. When she pulled it back, he was already looking down, a man in a dusted coat hat, pulled low beard peppered gray, like it couldn't decide what age to be. "I can mend fences," he said. "Don't need coin, just a roof, 3 days." Agnes studied him for a breath. His eyes were the kind that stayed still too long, the kind of still that only comes after running too far. She stepped aside without a word. He tipped his hat in thanks and stepped in like he'd done it 1,000 times before, but never here. His name was Thomas Elroy, or so he offered when she placed a chipped mug of coffee in front of him later that evening. They didn't talk much. She didn't ask and he didn't push. Silence sat between them like an old dog, familiar quiet. Sometimes sad, never cruel. That first night he slept in the hayloft. In the morning she found the chicken coop repaired and a stack of split wood by the back porch. By noon he was shoveling out the barn without being told. He worked like someone paying off a debt he wouldn't name. In the evenings he sat on the steps whittling bark into small wooden horses. He left them on the windowsill. Agnes didn't ask why, and he didn't explain. That was the rhythm of them, doing without telling, giving without naming. 3 nights and a coyote howled too close. Agnes stirred from her chair, shotgun in hand, but Thomas was already at the door, calm still. "It's gone," he said. She believed him. The townsfolk began to whisper. Someone saw him at the general store buying nails and salt. Someone else said he smelled like smoke and sorrow. Someone claimed he looked like a man from a poster once stapled to the sheriff's board. No one had proof, but Mesa Hollow didn't need proof, only time. On the 5th morning, it snowed a little, just enough to remind the earth it could still shiver. Thomas came in shoulders, wet coat, flapping behind him like a worn flag. Agnes poured coffee the way she always did. He stood at the window watching the sky, then said, "Your fence'll hold through winter now." She nodded, wiping her hands on her apron. Her lips moved just barely. "You leavin'?" He didn't answer. Just set his mug down real gentle and looked her square. "Thank you," he said, "for not asking what you didn't need to know." And then he tipped his bent hat, turned, and walked into the white hush of morning. Agnes didn't follow. She just stood there a while, watching the steam from the coffee rise and vanish like a promise too soft to keep. The morning after he left the house was quieter than usual, not because of the wind or the kettle or the far-off hum of cattle, but because something in the silence had changed. Agnes sat at the table with a biscuit gone cold in her hand. Across from her, the wooden horse he'd carved still stood on the windowsill, its tiny legs uneven, its face unfinished. She reached out once to move it, then let her hand fall back to her lap. Some things weren't meant to be straightened. For the next few days, she returned to routine. She swept the porch. She boiled linens. She lit the lamp by the window at sundown and let it burn until the oil choked. But it was different now, like the floor creaked in new ways, like the house breathed slower without someone else in it. Then came the rain. Not a storm, not a thunderclap kind of rain, just the slow, steady weeping of the sky. Agnes was pulling jars from the root cellar when her left foot buckled. She went down hard on her hip, her hand smacking against the cold stone. No cry, no moan. Just a sharp inhale and a grim set jaw. By the time she made it to the kitchen, the leg had gone stiff. She sat hard in the corner, fingers digging into the edge of the table to stay upright. The room spun once, then settled. That's when she reached up, opened the drawer, and pulled out the envelope. The letter, still sealed, still stained with time. 8 years it had sat there beneath old recipes and broken twine. From her son, mailed from Kansas. She never opened it, not because she hated him, not even because she was afraid, but because something inside her believed she wasn't ready for whatever words waited inside. The envelope trembled in her hand. She laid it gently on the table, then pressed her palm over it like trying to feel the heartbeat of a memory. Her eyes filled, not fast, not dramatic, just slow and full, like a pot left too long on the stove. She bowed her head not to pray, but because the room felt suddenly heavy, and that's when she heard the knock. 2 raps, not urgent, not polite either, just present. She struggled to rise, but before she could move, the door eased open. Thomas. Soaked to the bone, his coat dripped onto the wood floor. He didn't speak, just looked down at her, then at the letter, then back again. I slipped, she said, voice hoarse from disuse. He nodded, I figured. He crossed the room, knelt beside her, and lifted her gently to the chair like lifting a glass that had already cracked. Then he filled the kettle, stoked the fire, and placed a warm cloth on her leg without asking. They sat in silence, the rain pattering soft against the roof, the kettle humming in the background like a lullaby, no one sang out loud. After a long while, Agnes said, I was a mother once. Thomas looked at her, eyes soft but steady. You still are, he answered. They didn't speak again that night. But when she woke at dawn, the letter was still unopened. Only now it rested beside 2 mugs, one full, one empty, and a wooden horse placed carefully on top, its legs now even. It was Thomas who found it, the hidden place under the floorboards. Late one morning, while patching a leak in the barn's back corner, he noticed the plank by the feed bin sat slightly uneven. His boot caught it, and the edge lifted just enough to reveal a pocket of darkness beneath. He paused, not out of fear, but because he knew the weight of things people chose to bury. The hatch gave way with a soft creak, old hinges groaning like secrets being forced into the light. Inside was a small cedar box wrapped in oilcloth, tied shut with a strip of faded blue ribbon. Thomas didn't open it, not then. Instead, he brought it to the house, placed it quietly on the table, and walked back outside like nothing had changed. But something had. That night, Agnes sat staring at the box long after the lamp had dimmed. Her hands trembled slightly, not from age, but memory. Without asking, Thomas poured 2 cups of coffee, then took the seat across from her. The fire popped once in the hearth, sending sparks like nervous laughter into the dark. She untied the ribbon slowly, like a woman unwrapping her own ghost. Inside were 3 things. A silver medal etched with her husband's name, awarded for valor under pressure during the war. A plain gold ring, too small now for any living finger. And a folded paper yellowed with time, edges soft from being handled too many times. Thomas knew what it was before she opened it. A wanted poster. Faint sketch. Reward amount. 1 name scrawled beneath. Thomas Elroy, accused of theft, evasion, desertion, under fire. He didn't speak. Neither did she. Agnes looked up, eyes not angry, not afraid, just tired. How long you running? She asked finally. Thomas exhaled like the truth had been waiting in his lungs for years. Since before I knew how to stop. Agnes nodded. You kill anyone? He shook his head. Just ran when I should have stayed. She closed the box. I suppose we all did that once. Thomas rose, not fast but firm. He placed the mug on the counter and walked toward the door, pausing only to say, thank you for not turning me in. Her voice followed him flat and low. I didn't say I wouldn't. He looked back. She wasn't smiling, but neither was she holding the box anymore. It sat on the mantel now, not hidden, not displayed, just resting. That night, Thomas didn't sleep in the loft. He saddled his horse, wrapped a few things in a cloth, and tied them behind the saddle. No goodbyes, no farewells. Just a nod to the house as he rode out under a moon that didn't care who he'd been. Agnes watched from the window, face unreadable. She waited until the sound of hooves faded into the grass, then walked to the hearth, took the poster, and laid it gently on the coals. But she didn't light the fire. She just watched. Because sometimes the hardest part isn't burning the past. It's deciding whether to let it live one more night. Agnes didn't leave the house for a week after Thomas rode out, not because she feared the law would follow, but because she feared what she might do if it didn't. She boiled potatoes, mended socks, raked leaves until her fingers bled through the gloves. She needed the motion, the doing anything but the stillness where his voice used to sit. On the 8th day, she walked to town. It wasn't far, just over the ridge past the dry creek where the dust always rose before a wagon ever showed. She hadn't been in months, maybe longer. The store clerk blinked twice when he saw her. "Mrs. Morrow," he said, voice unsure if he should smile. "Heard you had a man around the place." Agnes didn't answer. She just placed a list on the counter, flour kerosene thread, and waited. Behind her, whispers began to flicker like matches in a dark room. Sheriff Clint stepped in not long after. Tall, gray mustache coat, always too clean for a man who claimed to work cattle. "Agnes," he said. "Not ma'am, not widow, just Agnes." She turned slowly as if her bones needed time to remember how. "We're looking for a man. Deserted his post about 10 years back. Name's Thomas Elroy. You heard it." Agnes stared at him. And for the first time in decades, she lied without blinking. "Never met the name, don't care to." The sheriff studied her jaw, tightening like he wanted to believe her, but didn't. "He might have stopped by. Some say he did. Plenty of men pass through," she said. "None stay." That was true, at least. Thomas hadn't stayed. Not really. The sheriff left with a polite tip of his hat and a muttered warning. "If he comes back and you're caught hiding him, it won't go soft." Agnes didn't answer. Just turned back to the counter and paid in full with coins she hadn't touched since her husband died. Outside, as she loaded the wagon, a girl from the post office trotted toward her, a brown envelope in hand. "Been holding this a while," the girl said, breathless. "Came from Kansas. From a man named Jonah Morrow." Agnes froze. Her son. The envelope had no date, just her name written in a hand too firm for a stranger. She tucked it in her coat without a word. The ride home was long, though the road hadn't changed. The wind picked up around the cottonwoods, and for a moment she thought she saw someone riding the ridgeline, a shadow in the distance, moving slow and steady westward. She didn't wave, didn't blink, just kept riding. That night she lit a candle and sat by the fire with the letter. She opened it with a knife, no shaking this time, no ceremony. Inside was a photo. A boy, maybe 7, freckles, straw hair, grin like a summer wind. The note beneath read, "Ma, this is Eli, your grandson. He doesn't know you, but he should. I've been foolish too long. I want him to know where the quiet in his heart comes from." Agnes traced the edges of the photo. The boy had her eyes. She folded the paper, slid it into a jar, and placed it on the mantel beside the wooden horse. Then she went into the kitchen and pulled out flour. She baked 2 loaves of bread, not 1, just in case someone ever knocked again. 2 days later, the firewood ran low. She went to the barn to chop. There in the far stall was a rope looped and hanging, swaying like it had just been dropped. And beneath it, muddy footprints. Too large to be hers. She said nothing, just picked up the axe and started chopping. Because if life had taught her anything, it was this. The people worth keeping never knock twice. They just find their way back when you stop standing in the doorway waiting for them. Sucker near. Winter came not like a storm, but like a sigh. A long, low hush that softened the hills and buried the fences in stillness. Agnes had seen 50 winters in Mesa Hollow. This one moved different, not colder, just heavier, like it wasn't the air that froze, but memory. By late December, the sky was bone white and unwilling. Days barely rose, nights fell too fast. She'd stopped checking the horizon, stopped listening for hooves. The rope in the barn stayed untouched, but she checked it sometimes, just once, like habit. Still there. Still swaying when the wind got sharp enough. Then one dusk the knock came. 3 taps, just like before. When she opened the door, it wasn't Thomas. It was a boy, maybe 7, freckles, straw hair, grin like a summer wind. The same boy in the photo. He stood on the porch, cheeks red from cold mittens, too large on his hands. Behind him, a woman, late 30s, coat button, wrong eyes, like she hadn't slept since Kansas. "Are you Mrs. Morrow?" the woman asked. Agnes nodded. Her voice caught, but she found it. I suppose I still am." The woman lowered her eyes. "I'm Ruth, Jonah's wife. He passed last spring. Wagon tipped in a creek bed. He'd been meaning to write. We found the letter in his coat." Agnes didn't flinch, didn't tremble. She stepped aside. "Come in, both of you. There's stew on the stove." They sat at the kitchen table, the same table Thomas had carved into with his boot once. Ruth stirred the stew with shaking hands, and the boy Eli watched Agnes like she was a question no one had ever answered. That night, no one spoke about what was lost, only what was left. Eli asked if she had horses. Agnes nodded, pointed toward the barn. He lit up. Can I see? Tomorrow, she said softly, when the snow stops biting. The next morning before dawn, Agnes woke to the creak of the barn door. She rose fast, heart tight, not in fear but memory. She pulled on her coat, stepped out into the white breath of morning. Inside, Eli stood beside the mare, the same old one Thomas had brushed once. He reached up, small hand on her flank, whispering things no one taught him to say. Agnes didn't interrupt, only watched. He moved like someone born from quiet people, from those who listened with their hands and healed with stillness. When he turned and saw her, he smiled. She told me she was lonely, he said, not embarrassed. Agnes felt her chest crack, not painfully but like thaw. Later that day, as Ruth packed to leave, her sister lived near the railroad. Agnes sat beside the boy by the hearth. You ever hear things others don't? She asked him, voice near the flame. Eli nodded. Sometimes. Papa said it's 'cause I was born in silence. Agnes smiled, then not soft, not polite but real. She placed her hand over his heart. Then listen close. This land, it remembers you. He leaned against her shoulder, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel like a woman waiting to be forgiven. She felt like a beginning. And out in the snow, a wooden horse still sat on the windowsill. Its legs finally, even its gaze turned west, toward whatever would come next. Spring didn't arrive like a trumpet. It crept shy, slow, as if unsure it was welcome. The snow thinned along the fence line, first revealing last year's grass, yellowed but alive. The creek began to mumble again beneath the hill, and birds returned not in flocks but in quiet pairs. Agnes stood by the window most mornings now, not waiting, just watching. Ruth had written once from Topeka. Said Eli was asking questions about horses, about old women who heard wind like music. Agnes sent back a small wooden horse carved from cedar with the boy's name etched beneath the hoof. No return letter came. She didn't need one. Some silences don't ache. They breathe. One morning she found herself walking the backfield, the place where Thomas once drove posts, sleeves rolled up, sweat marking his collar. The fence still held. Not perfect, but enough. She sat beneath the cottonwood, the one that never quite bloomed right but still refused to die. And that's where she saw him again. Not in flesh, not in voice, but in the way the sun hit the saddle prop beside the barn, in the faint smell of smoke where no fire burned, in the quiet part of her chest that whispered, "You are not forgotten." She returned to the porch and lit a lamp, though it wasn't dark yet, and she began to write. Not to Ruth, not to the sheriff, not even to Eli. She wrote to herself, to the girl she used to be, the woman who waited, the widow who stayed, the mother who forgave. And she wrote this: if you are ever asked why you stayed alone for so long, tell them it wasn't loneliness. Tell them it was listening. Tell them it was love. When the last light sank behind the ridge that night, Agnes stepped inside and poured 2 cups of coffee. She sat one across from her, the other she held. And outside in the hush between dusk and dark, Mesa Hollow listened. Not for hooves, not for knocks, but for the kind of quiet that stays after everything loud is gone. If your heart has ever paused for someone who never needed to speak to be understood, if you've ever sat in silence and felt more seen than in 1,000 words, then you already know what this story is. This one's for you. And if you'd like to sit by the fire again next time, when the wind picks up and the sky folds into amber, pull your chair closer. Subscribe to Still Winds of the West. We'll keep the lamp on.